Evening, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for another Reaper tutorial. So today we're going to be talking about drum routing, also known as how I make my virtual drums sound awesome. So we're going to talk about how to split all the drums out into the separate channels like you would a real drum kit, and the quick ways to do it, the long ways to do it, and we're going to do it with Steven Slate Drums and Superior Drummer as well separately, so you can see the process in action two different ways. There are other drum programs as well, like VST and Addictive Drums. I would imagine the process is exactly the same. They're not programs that I've used because I'm happy with what I've got, but the principle will be identical. So let's roll the tape. So, let's just close this MIDI window for a second. This is the result that we're aiming for. You hear how the kick sounds huge, the snare sounds huge, everything generally sounds huge. And you can see that I've got all these different channels going here. So this is actually one copy of Steven Slate Drums. So this is only one with so we've got the overheads, we've got the the toms, we've got the snares, but they're all coming out on separate channels. Now the place to start is we have to get all of those drums out separately to separate channels. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a plain old drum kit. We're going to get to this end point. So let's make a new drums channel, and we're going to start from scratch. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add in Steven Slate Drums. I'm going to use just for the purposes of this video the Chris Lord Algae Rock preset 1 from Superior Drummer. Actually, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to stick with the Slate one just because it's got simpler routing, I think. So I'm going to get rid of all the extra drums just to keep this simple for the purposes of this demo video. So I'm just going to copy my MIDI over from the track that we were doing. This is just a loop that I made that's not even... It's not even part of a track. This is just for the purposes of the demo that we're doing today. And so far, has that crash not loaded yet? Let's just have a quick look at the map converter. I'm just going to move that crash over. What's that B there? Ah, right, okay, so that's... Okay, so from what we can hear there, one of the toms is too loud, and it sounds like an unmixed drum kit. So the problem here is if I just close all this down and you look at Reaper, we've got one channel going on. That's it. So how do we make the separate drums sound great? How do we do things like send the snare to a separate reverb? How do we do things like, use a gate from one to another? We have to turn this stereo output into multiple files, so multiple channels. So the way to do that is in Reaper. If we open up SSD, have a look at this top bar here. There's a little thing that says 2/24 out. Now what that means, the first number is the number of channels we've told Reaper we want to use. And the second number there is the number of channels that this plugin is capable of outputting. So like a Superior Drummer, I think I can use 24 or 32 outputs. Contact by Native Instruments can use 16 or 64 outputs. But you then have to tell the program which outputs it can use and where they go and what we're sending where. So to do this, we have to line up so that the drum program, we have to tell it in the program, send the kick here, send the snare here, send the overheads here, so on and so on. Then we have to tell Reaper we are using this many channels. Then we have to tell it that there are new channels for that sound to arrive on. Now, there are a few ways of doing it. The first way we're going to do it is the slow and methodical way to try and explain and show in steps exactly how this is going to happen. So we're going to do the middle step first and set all our channels up. Then we're going to start sending out different drums to different outputs, so you'll be able to see it as it goes. So hopefully this will break this down quite well for you. There is a much quicker way, but we'll come to that at the end so that you understand the process, so that if there's anything doesn't quite go right for you, that if you click the kind of magic quick button and it doesn't all work, at least you'll understand why. So I always think it's quite important to understand how things work as well as knowing the shortcut buttons, because then when there are problems you can fix it just as quickly. So first things first, where it says 224 out, I'm going to give that a click, and that comes up with this, which is the plugin pin connector. Now if you see there's these two little blocks, what that means is channel 1 is going to output 1 and channel 2 is going to output 2. If I just click one, it turns it on and off. Now there's this tiny little plus button, and if I click that plus button, we get more outputs. So you see this number up here is now changed to 4 out of 24 outs. Now, generally speaking, these are all stereo, so I tend to think of them in pairs of channels. I mean, you can do mono routing if you so desire, but I keep it simple. I go kick on a stereo channel, snare on a stereo channel. I mean, processing power is so efficient now that, choosing between a mono and a stereo plugin really doesn't make a difference. And most of the plugins that I use now are stereo only anyway, so I just stick with this. So I'll go 2 for the kick, 2 for the snare, 2 for a tom, 2 for another tom, 2 for a third tom, 2 for the hi-hats, 2 for the overheads. Is that enough? 2 and 2 for ambient mics. Oh, that's starting to add them in 4 at a time. Interesting. So kick, snare, tom, 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 hi-hat, overhead, room. So that's now 16 outputs out of a possible 24. Now you see it says 16 out of 24 out up here, so that's one step done. But if we hit play, that's not done anything, really speaking. So what we have to do now is make a load of new tracks in Reaper. Now the quick way is to just double click in the empty space, which is what I like to do. So let's call these kick, snare, tom, rack, tom 1, rack, tom 2, floor, tom, hats, overheads, and room. So we've got a load of tracks. If we press play, that's still nothing's going to happen, because all we've done is we've made tracks and we've not told anything where it's supposed to go. So next step is we have to look at the routing for this new drums that we made. Now right now there are no sends, no receives, and the master send is ticked. So what I like to do for simplicity is have no master send on the drums, so that I can then send separately kick, snare, yada yada yada. Some people I've seen will use this channel maybe for the kick or something, but then if you touch the volume on it, that's going to start affecting things, which is really going to cause you a headache. So what I do is I untick master send, so that suddenly if I hit play, nothing's going to come out. You can see it says track channels 16 because we've already assigned 16 channels out through that little pin output connector. So this is where it gets clever. So if we go add sends, There's a load of channels here which are from the example that I showed you in the beginning. But let's go down to channel 12, which is the kick. Now you can see it says it's made a kick, it's made a send, but audio 1 and 2 is going to audio 1 and 2 on the new channel. Audio 1 and 2 is going to be the ones that we hear using a stereo interface because we've only got 2 channels. So what we have to do now is add in snare, rack tom 2, floor tom, hats, overheads, and room. Now here's where it gets interesting, because these will be sending channels 1 and 2, which in our minds we're going to use for the kick drum, to every one of these. If I hit play, it was going to be loud. Sorry about that. But that's because channels 1 and 2 are going to every one of these outputs. Now let's go back to the routing. What we want to do is, if I drop down what's going where, so on the snare, say it says audio 1 and 2, 1 and 2. If I drop that down and choose a stereo source, I've got all these choices that I can choose. So what I need is to choose channel 3 and 4 for the snare, because in our minds we said stereo pairs, so we're going to go stereo for the kick, stereo for the snare, stereo 5 and 6 for rack tom, so we're going to go 7 and 8, 9 and 10 for the floor tom. This is entirely arbitrary, by the way, in terms of which channels I'm using. I'm deciding this as I go. I could do them in a different order if you prefer having your hats earlier on, or if you do them in a different order, this still works absolutely fine. So hats 11 and 12, overheads 13, 14, and room 15, 16. So now we should be back to so you see we're back to having everything coming out of the kick channel. That's because we've got one step left, which is we haven't told Superior Drummer where to send each drum's sound. So that's our next step. Also an interesting thing, you could see the red, that's the MIDI. The drum MIDI is being sent out to every channel just because in our routing we've not told it not to. We've gone MIDI all to all. If I go MIDI none, that will stop that happening. And that may be useful for you to stop MIDI from causing problems in other plugins. Or you may want to use the MIDI for extra triggers, or I don't know, whatever it is that you've got going on. So the next step is we bring Slate Drums back into the mix, and we go into the mixer window. So Slate Drums has its own output, and you see that at the bottom here, every channel is told by default to go out of out 1 stereo. So what we want to do is, these are going to be named slightly differently to the ones that are in Superior, not in Superior, the ones in Reaper, because the ones in Reaper are named 1 and 2, channels 3 and 4, channels 5 and 6. So 1 and 2 is going to be out 1 stereo, 3 and 4 is going to be out 2 stereo, because they're counting it as pairs. So we've got to think of it like that. So if we look at this, so kick should be going out of out 1, snare, top and bottom should be going out snare 2. There's another thing for you. If you personally want your snare top and bottom to come out on separate channels, this is how you would do it as well. You would have another channel. So instead of just snare like I've done, you'd have snare top and snare bottom. If you prefer to work that way, go for it. I personally treat the two as a whole if I can, because the Steven Slate drums are recorded well, so it's not as if I have to do any corrective EQ. But if you want to, this is how you would do it. So tom 10 would be output 3, tom 12 I think would also be, yeah, I think that's right, because there's 4 toms here. I think if I hit play, so can you see here that the snare and toms, as I've routed them, are now coming out of different channels. It doesn't sound any different yet. So hi-hats out of 6, ride, china, splash. Let's take them out the same as the overheads. I You can, if you want, route your spot mics out separately. I personally tend to just level blend them in with the overheads and treat that as a separate thing. And then room out of 8. So if I just take this to the side, so when I hit play you can see all these levels. So what we can do is I can solo the kick now, solo the snare, and I've got my hats, overheads, and I now have complete freedom to mix these as I see fit with the plugins that I choose. I can send, say, the snare. If I made a reverb channel, I could send the snare out to the reverb on its own. I can then, what I like to do is have all of these in a folder. I mean, you could technically send these to an aux send if that's how you work, but if I call this drum group and stick all of these into the drum group folder, I can then solo the drums and put something like parallel compression on that channel rather than having separate sends. I like to work that way, but this has opened up the freedom for me to do things any which way that I like. And this works for any of the major drum programs. I used to do this in Easy Drummer back in 2007, so I know that that's possible. In fact, that was where I found this entire way of working. So just for argument's sake, we're going to do two things now. We're going to move to Superior Drummer instead of Slate Drums, and we're going to go for the quick way of doing this. So this is going to save a lot of time. So this is going to be drums mixed, drum group SSD. So let's make ourselves a new folder. So let's make drum group Superior, and just kind of call this track Superior. So let's just make sure I've got it on this computer. I do indeed. Superior Drummer 2, blah blah blah. Okay, so this is Superior Drummer. I've loaded up the electronic kit just because it's one that I have readily available. I've just realised I've switched out the hard drive in this and I need to set everything up. But this proves the point perfectly well. So if I load the same drum MIDI here. So it sounds a little weird, but hey, it's a cool kit. So if I hit the effects button on this channel Superior, then this comes up as the standard effects window. You can either float the panel for the effect you want, or you can have it in this full effects window. Now, if it's in this effects window, which is where you need to be, there's an options tab and then build multi-channel routing for output of selected effects. This button is amazing. I click that. Do you want to add the following in tracks for this effect? And I hit yes. And suddenly that magically changes that 2/32 out to a full 32. And if we look behind the plugin, what's this? All these channels have automatically been routed for me. The master's been turned off on Superior, and now that's exactly like with Steven Slate Drums. It's still all coming out of channel 1 and 2 because we've not told it. We've not told Superior what to do with those channels. So the next step is we go into the mixer for Superior. And where it says out 1 and 2 at the bottom here, we get all these choices. And the best thing to do is click the multi-channel button, because that saves you a lot of time, because all that routing that we did in Steven Slate Drums is just done. So if I hit play now, so that particular sound is really annoying me, but I just found the fader and turned it down. Something that I've just noticed here is all those channels that it made, it didn't make them inside this folder, but if I just drag them in, that's it. So now I can solo or our electronic Superior version, or this one. And there we have it. In the time that it has taken me to talk through this, I've made 2 full multi-out drum rooted setups. One with Superior, one with Steven Slate Drums. One was the long way, one was the short way. And because I know how the routing works with all the sends and receives, that's going to save me a lot of time, and has done over the years, because I can now treat that like a real kit. I can do things like take the low end out of the overheads and smash them with compression, take some mids out of the room and then tame them, send the snare to a reverb, take the snare bottom out separately and maybe use a transient designer, get a decent analog saturator on the kick. On the let's just switch back to the mixed version that I did. I had Slate's virtual tape machine on everything, which of course you can't do separately, and this independently affects each channel, which adds a cumulative effect, which is very different to just adding it on the master bus. There are so many things that this will then afford you the opportunity to do, and this will hopefully elevate your mixes where you don't have access to a real drum kit, from home demo to serious contender for a decent release. This is how you do it. This is how the pros do it, and I'm sure there are equivalents to this in Logic, Cubase, Pro Tools, but being a Reaper user, this is how I do it, and hopefully you'll find this useful. Thanks for watching, guys, and hope you found this useful. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Check out our Patreon as well, which is Hop Pole Studios. Anything that you guys can help us with helps me to find the time to make more of these kind of demos. I mean, as an example, I'm going to work at a bar this evening because I still have to fill in some time pulling some pints to make ends meet. And if you guys could help us out on Patreon, then I'd probably have more time to make more of these kind of videos on anything that you guys request. In the meantime, we also have our new guitar cabinets out through 2 Notes. The Zilla Hot Pole pack is going to be available very soon. The individual cabinets are already available for Wall of Sound and the Torpedo hardware, but we're going to be doing a special sale soon as well, which we're going to be working with 2 Notes. I've got the Audien ASP 800 and 880 videos to come out. A video where I'm comparing the PRS Tremonti USA with a very cheap guitar. And there's so much more to come, so thanks for watching, stick around, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers, bye.